I was just thinking of one I didn't look up yet. Probably my brain keeps thinking of new stuff to look up. Do you remember in Jeremiah where the prophecy was that Daniel had been studying? That was the 70 years.
Yeah, that is actually an important connection to,
Jeremiah, I think it was Jeremiah. 70 years. King James got one.
So I've started to learn, this is going to sound weird, but it still it works so well. I've started to learn to trust Google to do a lot of Bible research.
Yeah. Did you come up with it already?
Well, all I did was type in Jeremiah and 70 years.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, what did I get? I get 70 weeks is in Wikipedia. I'm really just looking for the Bible reference. And sometimes it comes right up. It says, oh yeah, that's in Jeremiah such and such. Here it is. Looks like it might be Jeremiah 25, 11, and 12. Let's see if that's true. Jeremiah. And this whole land shall be a desolation and an astonishment, and these nations shall serve the king of Babylon 70 years.
Yeah, there it is.
Yep.
All right, well, hang on to that one.
So that's Jeremiah, which you're saying would have been before Daniel's time. So Daniel would have been reading that and expecting something at the end of that 70-year
Well,
period.
that's what brings him to the prayer in Daniel 9.
9, yeah. Which is an amazing prayer.
Yeah. What does it say in 2 Chronicles 36, 20, and 21?
2 Chronicles 36. And those who escaped from the sword he carried away to Babylon, where they became servants to him and his sons until the rule of the king of Persia, to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. As long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Interesting.
Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. All right, so those two we'll need.
It's interesting that in that regard, it's saying that a Sabbath was a rest of the land.
Yeah. 70 years continuous of Sabbath.
Yeah.
Rest from what, though? Plants still grew.
Right.
Some people still live there. The Samaritans still live there. Mixed multitudes still live there. So it wasn't really a rest of no gardening. It was a rest from the pollution of the idolatry that Israel had gotten into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Dennis, we can see you on your, are you on your phone now? Yeah, you're muted, but maybe you can unmute on the phone, huh? Maybe if I click the ask to unmute, it'll make it. There you go.
Oh, now can you hear me?
Hey, over here.
All right, there you go. I just had to have my voice heard. So sorry, guys.
That's good. We
By the
want to
way-
hear your voice.
Oh, by the way, this is exactly what Lucille and I are studying. We're actually we bought some books from Kenneth Copeland on Daniel Revelation. We want to dig deep into it. It's interesting you're doing the same thing because that's what we're doing as well.
Great. Perfect
You
timing to.
can explain it to us today.
Yeah. You probably called me for a totally different reason, huh?
Well, I just called to say hi is what I did.
Yeah. Well, and you
Hi.
got roped into a deep study, so there you go.
Oh, boy, roped in. Well, they say, a rope with many cords is strong.
Yeah, that's
What's
right.
up with that?
So Kenny texted me after the meeting this morning and asked me if he said, are all the people in this group, are they or no, I think he said he's assuming that none of them are Adventists. I said, no, most of them are Adventists actually. And he said he didn't get the sense many cared for Ellen White.
Who said that, Kenny?
Yeah, Kenny said that. And so I explained, no, we're just trying to be sensitive to anyone who might be listening or whatever, that we're not trying to base everything that we think or believe only on Ellen White. So anyway, it's just interesting that he had that perspective of how we were doing things. He wasn't saying he had a problem. In fact, he added the thought that it's a lot of the same as Scripture, just adds a different color to it. So same message, more colorful. Not really different, just explained in more colorful context. Yeah, those were his words.
Well, there's a lot of people that are leery of Ellen White. I know I was when I first came in.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, there were a lot of people leery of Jeremiah and
Well, partly we're
Isaiah.
on our Sabbath morning one. We're trying to be open and available for people from any denomination to be invited. So, in that regard, we need to be able to teach what we're teaching without Ellen White. Then, in our afternoon study, we use lots of Ellen White, and some people don't come because of that, but that's okay.
Yep.
Well, I think everyone's here. Should we get started?
I'm sorry. I wanted to add to that.
Go ahead, Frank.
Go, Frank.
Well, as an outsider, I was like, these guys like Mormons or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, she has, I liked how John put it. She adds more vibrancy or color to Scripture.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you ever read the Book of Mormon, it's more complicated than Scripture.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
I think I got about halfway through it. And
Did you?
like, oh my.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got the King James flavor going, but other than that, it's like, oh, this is interesting, strange.
Yeah. to me it felt like it was just trying to be a Bible. It was trying to be one. And so, yeah, it was trying to sound like King James.
Well, good. Looks like we scared off all the ones that wouldn't be interested in this topic.
Yeah.
Bobby, speaking of
Yep.
scared, I used to, before I became an Adventist, I didn't have a lot of the answers to the Seventh-day, to the Jehovah Witnesses or the Latter-day Saints when they came to my door.
Yeah.
Ever since I became an Adventist and learned all these truths, now I invite them to come to my door, and they come in, and now they've labeled my address as one place not to bother.
Don't bother Dennis.
They don't come anymore.
Right. Then when you see him walking down the street, you have to say, "Hey, I haven't seen you guys in a while. Where you been?"
Yeah. So,
All right. Well, I guess we should get some input here. Frank's done a lot of study on this. Dennis doing study on it right now. And my mom's done a lot of history study. John, so you guys got to tell me with the group that we have, how much or how you want to approach this. If we had people that had lots of questions, I'd just take it piece by piece, step by step, and build it. But I don't know if this group necessarily needs it or not. So you can give me some input here as to how you'd like to do this.
Well, it seems it was originally connected to our study of Revelation 12. And I think, if I remember, the tone of that study was the questions people were having were really based on timeline, in the sense that, well, if this is talking about when Jesus showed up, then why all of a sudden does this mention of war breaking out in heaven and the dragon pulling it down angels, it seems out of context, right? And so I think what the people were originally struggling with was, is it sequential? And when it doesn't seem to be sequential, how do we work with that? And then the other question did come up about, well, how do I know I can trust the 2300 days prophecy and the 1260?
Yeah, I think, this wasn't to help with Revelation with the sequence there. I think what I said about that was the sequence was exactly as it reads there. But this was, about, okay, previous timelines and 2300 days. And most of us have grown up hearing this stuff since we're little, but may not really know what it means to present it, if we need to, in detail to another Bible scholar who's not used to these formulas and dates.
Mm-hmm.
Like for instance, I will say, when I start researching this sort of timeline thing, I'm always interested in having as much history and dates confirmed as possible outside Adventist authors. In other words, if you look up the date 457 and maybe the date of 1798 or 538, I guess 538 is the one, you like hardly anybody's commenting on it. You don't see really much explained in Wikipedia or Britannica, or I was on the Catholic encyclopedia looking for some of these times and dates, and there's some very specific ones here that we use, talking about Adventists. And so there's a bunch of Adventist authors, but I sometimes wonder, well, so am I relying on people who are trying to make that date work, or what are we doing? So I like to read stuff outside and go, well, so is this on Wikipedia or Britannica or somewhere in history, like Flavius Josephus, or History of the Reformation is a great book with lots of info in it. So to me,
Also,
that builds strength to it, not just expecting us to bend it to our theory.
Right.
I just want to add that you can't read Revelation as it's thinking that it's chronological, because it's not written that way.
And yeah, a lot of it is very chronological, but you got to figure out, like, there's one break in the middle where you seem to pause, and then it backs up. But that one in with the Michael fighting and the dragon and so on, that actually is in reference to the time period exactly that's being discussed in 12, which is Christ on the earth doing battle with the dragon. And I think we discussed that one before, but I think we normally think of that as, oh, we just jumped way back in time to Lucifer and before the history of the earth. But there's nothing really, though we know the battle started back then, that whole sequence of verses is really discussing very specific things going on during the life of Christ. And I think that it's fine to keep it in that context right there, because that's where you see the height of the battle. That's where you see for sure no one in heaven anymore. After that, it says in Desire of Ages, is listening to the dragon. So no more place found for him and his third of the stars, right? So that was actually accomplished right there at the cross. Whereas back before the history of Adam and Eve, there was war, but it wasn't really solved yet. It wasn't fully cast out, so to speak. Anyway, so that's just what we were talking about a few weeks ago. I don't remember if you were on for that.
That's a huge distinction, really, if you think about it, because most people will assume that it's talking about the war that happened before Adam and Eve were even conceived or created.
Yeah, and I don't want to suggest that there wasn't war before, but
Right.
there's a major sort of finality of the battle when you get to the cross. And
Right.
Yeah.
we just sort of listened to Ellen White's comments on what the angels thought, when he was born, the unfallen angels, and what the unfallen worlds, how they had sympathies still towards Lucifer until the cross. And so it makes sense that that description of the male child and the Michael doing battle with Lucifer or the dragon makes very much sense that it's connected right there to the battle that took place on the earth.
Yeah.
But 2,300 days, 70 weeks. What do you guys want to do here? You want to walk through the times and the dates here, and maybe you guys don't even have any questions about this.
Well, if there's a way to just hit the high level, I mean, one of the things is, how do we know when to start the 2,300 days? Isn't there like actually 3 options to choose from? And so the question is, why did we choose the one we chose?
Well, okay, so let's start with the 70 weeks, and I'll just kind of go quick with some thoughts and ideas. And since you guys have all worked on this quite a bit before, you can tell me where you want to talk about more pieces of it. But the 70 weeks, you got to start there, because the 70 weeks give us the sequence of the 7 weeks, and then the 62 weeks, which makes 69 weeks. And then at the end of the 69 weeks, you have another week added on, which makes the 70th week. And that one's split in the middle. And it's very clear in the verses, which I've got, right here on the screen in front of you to start this stuff with. Hold on, let me just get where I can move it. On the left side of the screen there, we're in Daniel, and it's talking about that should be 7 weeks, and then 62 weeks, and then something's going to happen. And then troublesome times, and after the 62 weeks, then Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself, and the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end of it shall be with a flood. And so then you get down here to verse 27, and it's talking about that Messiah after the 62 weeks doing something with the 1 week here in verse 27, but in the middle of the week, he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offers. I think this is the place that you really got to start, because here's our dilemma, and even if you've thought through this before, the 457 BC, which is normally where we have the starting point of the command to go forth and rebuild Jerusalem. Problem is, historically, there's 3 commands. One of them is about 100 years before that. And so you've got King Darius first, and then King Cyrus has a command, and then finally Artaxerxes. And how do we determine which one to use? And there's lots of arguments still today. Even I talk to Adventists all the time who want to talk privately, and they say, well, I just don't really know about this 2,300 days and really started in the 457 because there was 3 and they're spread out over time. So what do you got for thoughts on yeah, how do we establish that 457 is the correct date?
Well, I think to be intellectually honest, what you would do is plug in the timeline to each one of those and then check to see where that puts you at the end of it historically, and find out if there was anything that happened of any significance that would make it fit.
Good. In other words, it's okay to try to slide this thing around a little bit and see what fits. Now, of course, we have to also establish in this that we really are supposed to use the day for a year kind of thing. And that's a whole nother controversy. People want to say, well, that was only that one prophecy there in Ezra where it established that, and so on and so on. But again, if you try this as literal weeks, therefore turn it into days instead of years, and try to lay it out so that it fits all the details of the prophecy, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so here's the other side of this little dilemma. What was the actual date of the death of Christ? Do we know?
31
I
AD?
say
31 AD. So can we get proof of that on Wikipedia or Britannica, or where do we got some factual evidence for that? Because the Bible doesn't give any of those dates.
That's a good question, because most of the, because I've got that off of a 2,300-day prophecy from Daniel 8:14, a graphic that I have on a website, on my own website.
Exactly.
And that's a good point.
And this is, great for us to look at and reference these charts and other people's research, but it's good, I think, to ask the question, well, wait a minute, how do we establish that? Because
we established it through the birth of Christ, because that we do have in Matthew when it was done.
Okay,
because,
so do we know the actual date of Jesus's birth, like which year?
Well, what I found in
what
I found in Wikipedia is still not exact. They're saying most scholars assume a date of birth between 6 and 4 BC.
Right. So
yeah.
Now we say, well, that's Wikipedia. We don't know if we can trust that.
Sure.
But if you check the actual encyclopedia, it says the same thing. Check the Catholic encyclopedia, it says the same thing. So all of a sudden I'm like, well, wait a minute. We can't even nail down the exact year Jesus was born. So how do we establish anything on here as a for sure starting date? Because if we knew, like when we lay out the 70 weeks, you guys all know, okay, so we've got crucifixion in the middle of the last week, which is the 1 week after the 69 weeks, the 70th week. So we know, all right, in the middle, 3.5 years into that week should be the crucifixion, but we don't seem to know. The Wikipedia gives us a range of 4 years where that crucifixion could have happened. And then on the birth, which isn't even on the drawing usually or the chart, but if we knew that, we could do some math and figure out, well, he lived 33.5 years or whatever. But it's interesting that all those things, there's like a little bit of slop in there, and prophecy should be able to be nailed down.
Right. So if you have, like, let's just imagine we put all these potential numbers on the table.
Yeah,
What we really need is a solid at least one number that we know to be correct.
exactly.
And then you can say, okay, well, this one is established. Then you take all the prophecies and you test them against the one date that is established. And then you can start to make very educated assumptions then, because you have a starting point that's solid.
Right. So I spent a week, not this last week, but the week before, pouring through the encyclopedias and the history of the Reformation and anything I could find just on any website, wherever. I found a lot of Adventist documentation that just made the assumption that 457 was the starting date. But outside of that, and the charts that we as Adventists have just built, I couldn't find that you could nail down 457 for sure or 31 AD for sure. But what I did find was if you try any of the three commands, right, from Darius, Cyrus, or Artaxerxes, if you try starting with those dates, which we do have, so you pick one of those three and then try to make it land somewhere between 29 and 33 AD as the crucifixion, and they don't hit, they miss. But if you take 457, which is the only other option of a decree from the king sending them back to Jerusalem, then you actually land in 31 AD, which is right in the middle of the 4-year potential time of the crucifixion of Christ. And what we did was we used the three options at the beginning and compared them with the 4 years of options for the crucifixion. And the only formula that works is 457 and then crucifixion in 31 AD. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's intellectually being honest with the information.
Right.
Right. You're willing to test it all and allow it to speak for itself instead of running on assumption and yeah. So
I enjoyed actually that because always before I've just referred to, what it says in Great Controversy or what it said on the chart and go, oh yeah, see, everybody should know this. And then I looked up Death of Christ on any other information and go, wait a minute, that's not even, we don't even have a date for that. But I think this is what William Miller went through, actually, is, trying those dates and then shifting them back and forth. And the 70 weeks, actually, one, it's not related to the 2300 days yet. It's not somehow trying to be connected to 1844 yet. It kind of stands all on its own. And the other thing that happens is that when it stands on its own and the math comes out exactly right, well, then you can try taking the day for a year off there and go what if these are little days, and try the different formulas, and you won't come up with any formula that fits with the description of the Messiah being cut off and establishing a covenant and all the components and parts that are really part of that prophecy in Daniel until you've got it like this. And then that tells me, all right, this thing is really solid, right? Not just because some Adventist organization made me a nice chart to look at.
Well, and that, again, by using it that way, you are reestablishing the foundation of a day for a year, because you've actually tested that and said, well, let's look at it. If it's a literal day for a day, then let's see if it fits. And when it doesn't, then you almost have to accept the day for a year principle.
Right.
So.
Anybody else got thoughts?
Bobby?
Yes, go ahead.
This is Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Yeah, hi. I see if I can find my thoughts. I tried a few minutes ago here. So different people have different dates, like when Jesus was crucified, like they have 33, they have 27. And so like you were saying, I think you sort of answered my question. Where I found it was good old Adventist, in Ellen White's writings. And so I think finding that particular place to start from, which I don't know if you mentioned it, is the command of going forth. Was that not it? Is that the key one to start with?
Well, the problem is there was 3 commands spread out over about 100 years.
Right. But the command of going forth to rebuild, right?
Right. So if I take 490 years, which is the total of the 70 weeks, right? If we add it up in years, 490 years, and I lay that as a measuring tape, and I try starting at one of those 3 commands to rebuild the temple, only one of them allows me to land within the range of Jesus's crucifixion, which is the ones that I saw were like 29 through 33. And it lands right on 31. And so I couldn't say that sort of like, well, I got this out of Britannica or I got this out of Wikipedia that tells me 31 AD is the right date. But 457 is established in other documentation as the command from Artaxerxes. And then there's the other 2 commands before, but if I start on those dates, then I miss the crucifixion date altogether.
So it would be Daniel, then Daniel 9, what do I got, 25, is it? Know therefore and understand that from the going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem,
Right.
to the coming of an anointed one, a prince, there will be 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But I mean,
Right.
that's 70 week. Is that the
70
70?
weeks. Yeah.
7 weeks and 3 starting 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you got 7 plus 62 plus 1.
But now
Which
is this also a point of, this is the 70, this is not the 2300, right?
Yeah, this is just to establish the 70.
Oh, okay. All right. I got
And
you.
what I was doing, just to say it one more time, Debbie, is I was allowing, I've been asked by a lot of Adventists, and I'm going to tell you in a minute what my answer used to be. But I've been asked a lot of times, well, how do we know it's the command from Artaxerxes? Because there was 2 other commands, right? And so to me, this was an exercise for me personally to say, yeah, how do I know for sure it was Artaxerxes 457? And so what I did is I thought, well, I could start from the crucifixion and work backwards. But then I found, no, the crucifixion date is like 4-year spread there. They don't know where it is. And so that doesn't answer the question until I use the whole 70 weeks like a tape measure and go, which starting point arrives somewhere between 29 and 33 AD. And that told me, okay, 457, which is one of the commands to rebuild Jerusalem. If I use that as the starting point, then the 7-week prophecy puts the crucifixion in 31 AD. And so I'm comfortable with that.
Right, because it was autumn of 457 BC.
Right, exactly.
Now, what do the people do that have this whole different thinking, like my neighbors on the 69 weeks and that we're in like that 70th week? How do they come up with the crucifixion year? Does that make sense?
Great question. And they don't actually. What they do is they move, typically this is one of the theories that I've heard and looked at, is they move the 7th week entirely out of place to the future. So they've got the 7 weeks plus the 62 weeks, which makes the 69 weeks. And depending which dates and theories they're building, then sometimes they jump the 7th or the last week of the 70th week completely like disconnected in time and jump over somewhere else. So some believe, for instance, that we finished the first 3.5 weeks, but the second 3.5 weeks is for some time way in our future. So you got like a over 2,000 year span somewhere between the first 3.5 weeks and the second 3.5 weeks. So that's my point, is that all the other theories kind of keep breaking it apart or pulling it apart or bending it to try to fit some theory that they like, instead of just testing the dates and saying, wait a minute, how does this actually, how can it fit?
So Bobby, how so do they not care? They do not come up with the year that Jesus had the crucifixion? No,
Not always. Not always, because
or they just don't care. Then I mean,
yeah,
so
it's,
is this the study that the study that gives us when Christ died?
yeah, I think so. I think this one, at least when I look at it the way that it's presented from 457 to 31 AD with crucifixion there, that establishes a couple of things in my mind. One of the pieces is it tells us what year the crucifixion was.
Hello.
Probably more important than that, in a big way, it
Well, actually, I'm
establishes
in the
the
middle of
pattern
I'm on a Zoom
of
call,
prophecy.
but
The pattern of prophecy shouldn't be that we keep
okay.
say this. I'm a little nervous about this in Revelation, where we keep pulling pieces apart and then trying to rearrange them in time. There's some obvious where we switch in time, but too often when we can't explain it, we just come up with, well, that's not related in sequence. Well, that's not a great idea. Here if you take the prophecies in Daniel, when I worked on the first dream, which was the statue, and then the second one, which was the four beasts, and then the third one, which was the he-goat and the ram, or the ram and the he-goat, every single piece of the descriptions of those prophecies land in this time frame without bending it all apart and moving stuff around. So I think part of it is, yes, they're not really looking for that much consistency. They're just looking for, oh, look, here's 70 weeks, and there's supposed to be a 7-week, and there's supposed to be a 60 or 62 weeks. And then there's this other week, and so where could we put it? You know, well, maybe that's over here, maybe it's over here. And we don't really follow the way that prophecy, like to me, if I look at most of the prophecies that even that aren't timelines, they follow very kind of strict structures about how to present it. And anyway, so it makes me confident both in the dates that we've come up with here, as well as this is how they're meant to fit together, because so much of the prophecy pieces are then fitting right into the scene. You know, you've got discussion about the horns and the four horns and the little horn, and then we get the little horn in two places in Daniel, and then we get the little horn over in Revelation, and pretty soon those start overlaying to exactly line up with this whole picture of what's going on.
So what happened at the 62 weeks? It says, and after the 62 weeks, an anointed one shall be cut off and shall have nothing. What is that 62 week?
Well, so you have to keep the 7 weeks. When you read it, it says, let me go back to it on here. Maybe. Right, it says, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So that equals 69 weeks. So when you're reading after the 62, it means what immediately follows the 62 plus the 7, which is the 69. So you have 483 years, which is 69 weeks. And then there's supposed to be this identification of a Messiah, which really lands then at the baptism date of 27 AD. So 27 AD would be the end of the 69 weeks, and the 70th, the last week, starts in 27 AD, and 3.5 years, so half of the week, lands us in 31 AD, and then the second half of the 3.5 years of the week would land us at 34, the date that Stephen got stoned.
So the end is, stoning of Stephen was when they rejected, right? That's
complete. In the prophecies it says the completion of abomination, right? So this is where the abomination of the Jews of that time period came to its full and complete, what do you want to call it, fruition or fulfilled, or so you also have in there what I think is really cool, just for fun, is if we're talking about the full 70 weeks landing at Stephen's stoning, the complete rejection of the leadership of the Israelite nation towards Christ, that actually equals 490 years. And Jesus said to Peter, you need to forgive 7 times 70, which is 490. And this is really what Christ was referring to, that God was going to, basically extend forgiveness. Remember, it says you can sin against, Jesus said, you can sin against the Son of Man and it'll be forgiven you. But if you sin against the Holy Spirit, that can't be forgiven or fixed, right? So really, he's referring to this 490-year time frame from when Israel would start rebuilding Jerusalem, but they'd still get off track. They'd get so far off track, and then in that final week, when Christ is going to establish a covenant, they're going to reject him, most of them. And then that rejection or that abomination was in full swing. Now, Jesus told us before the crucifixion, he did the parable of the fig tree, which was really pointing to the condition, but the condition was confirmed at the stoning of Stephen in 34 AD.
So is the purpose of the 70-week prophecy the grace that God has given to his Israelite people, and it really is the abomination of desolation is the ultimate at the end of that 70 weeks I mean, I've never connected it like that before, but am I off, or can you?
No, that's correct in the sense that that's one of the messages we get out of determining the details of this prophecy. You also, though, we have to add that Jerusalem was not destroyed in 34 AD. That didn't come till 70 AD. So,
So
I
what
think
do we do with that?
That was 70 AD.
I know, but so what do we do with that? That's outside of the 70 weeks.
No, I don't think. I think that the point is that after 34, which was the stoning of Stephen, the 70 weeks ended as this issue about a nation. Like could the nation turn? Would the nation turn? Would God keep them intact as a nation if they turned? But when they stoned Stephen, 3.5 years, I remember if you just go by his sermon, Stephen's sermon fits really well here because he recounts all the way back to Abraham. And he starts marching through the history of rejection of Israel towards God, how it repeats and repeats and repeats. Now, he goes back further than the 70 weeks because the 70 weeks starts, in 457. But Stephen, he goes back way back. But he brings us up to this moment in 34 AD where he says, you stiff-necked people, you always rebel. And he said, you have proven that you're your ancestors' children. Well, connect that with Jesus saying, you say you're sons of Abraham, but I tell you, you're sons of the devil. So that's all building this sort of understanding of the desolation, which is really about the abomination of desolation. And our 70 weeks, it's okay that it ends in 34, and then we've got a little bit more time, which is really where the Spirit now is withdrawing as things are getting worse and worse and worse as you approach 70 AD, which is only, 36 years past Stephen.
So they still had another 36 years before the city was destroyed.
Exactly.
So in other words, do you think that, I mean, I don't know if we can take this and have a second application of probation close or that kind of thing, is that here they have one final from stoning of Stephen. There's those listening that are going to turn, and they have that 36 years of those people that didn't hear anything like this before turn.
Well, and so largely what you have is at the stoning of Stephen, what it says in the book of Acts is after that, the disciples scattered and went to the whole world. So part of the purpose of the date in 34 was really that God would mark that, look, okay, you see this level of rejection? You know, maybe they were confused when they crucified Jesus, but now they've had another 3.5 years to hear it again and again and again. And they're so intent on rebellion and rejection that they're going to kill Stephen. Well, so when that happened, was like the marker moment when many of the disciples left Jerusalem. Not all, some stayed, but many of them left, and they now took the gospel to the Gentiles.
When the stoning of Stephen is when they went to the world?
Yeah, it's when they, specifically, because Jesus told them before, stay in Jerusalem. And he told them before that, don't go to any of the house of the Gentiles, only go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But the moment for that to end and for it to go blown wide open to take it everywhere was 34 AD.
And is that when they had the upper room experience or before that?
No, upper room would have been just at 50 days after the crucifixion.
Oh, okay.
I think they were still kind of doing upper room on through Stephen's story, but then specifically they went, to the rest of the world. And I think obviously 36 more years, but it switched from sort of probation being closed for a nation to it's still open for individuals. Because remember, when Titus came and the gate, well, I guess not Titus, the guy before him, and the gate was opened in the night, all the believers got out. So if there were any believers converted between 34 and 70, that's perfectly okay. That was the point of them staying longer in Jerusalem, was individual conversions. But as a nation, and any question about it ever being again about that nation should be closed when we get to this ending of the 70 weeks. Which is why I think the prophecy is talking about the conclusion or the finishing or the filling up of the abomination.
Well, back then, a generation was considered to be 40 years. So it's basically the end of that generation was the end of it all.
Yeah, good, Ken. That's a good connection.
What was Stephen?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Anything else? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I just went through the wall chart of world history. I'm sure some people have that. It's a little off too because it's from '97.
Yeah.
But it had the crucifixion at 32 AD.
32. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's close. I mean, that's a lot of data to put together.
Oh yeah, this wall chart's crazy.
Well, Frank, that difference in 1 year really is they probably forgot the changeover from BC to AD.
So let me toss a few things about history in here, since you brought up the wall chart, Frank. Excuse me. And that is that it's amazing nowadays, even from when I was in high school, to actually dive into this history because, man, it's right at your fingertips. I mean, you can have Wikipedia, Encyclopedia, Catholic Encyclopedia, History of the Reformation, all just right there on your computer and be searching it out or your phone or whatever. So it is really useful. I did a bunch of this that I'm not going to try to reiterate all today, but once I said, okay, 457. So let me read. Can I read anything about what went on in 457 or 456 or 458, right? And reading other outside of Adventist charts and formulas, what can we read about what was going on? Who was the Pope? Who was the Emperor? Who was, and you can do that with all these dates. One of the most interesting ones to me was, we haven't got to this one yet, but the 538 date as commencing of the 1260 years. That date is like, again, you can't really nail that down in historical context very well. We get I found 537, and finally I found a sort of a connection to 538, but the way that we just present it on a chart or we're kind of asking people to just let us draw a conclusion for you without showing that, okay, wait a minute, this date you can't nail down just quick and easy, right? So looking at some of that stuff is really fun. I learned about Constantine again. and some of the decrees he made and the effects he had on the Christian church or the world of Rome. And then Justinian. Justinian is where the 538 subject is kind of being worked on. Justinian, what his decrees were, and what he did as an emperor, and I learned, oh wait, he wasn't the Pope. It was a different Pope, and then he had that Pope arrested, and then but anyway, so that stuff is very easily accessed. Again, it's very academic, lots of details, lots of dates, but it's worth doing some of that research to really be familiar with our history of all these pieces. I love that Great Controversy sort of gives us a quick overview of all that. And to me, that was for a long time, that was enough. Wasn't really interested in too much more detail. So I think a lot of people will be happy with what's in there.
Bobby?
But it's really accessible now to get to a lot more detail. Go ahead, David.
So the 457 that
Yep.
we have, as far as going out of the word to restore and build Jerusalem, we get that date actually from history, because would that be who's that historian that wrote that? Josephus. Do we get that from Josephus? In other words, we do pull a date from the outside of the Bible, right? I mean, in other words,
Right.
History tells us that date. It matches. I mean,
Right.
It matches that this is when this happened. Is that correct?
Yes, that's how we're trying to, just rediscover the pieces for our own self of where do we really get this? Is it just Adventists who made up some dates, or is it really founded somewhere? And that's what I thought was interesting about the 70 weeks, is that you got kind of a range on both ends of the 70 weeks until you try it with Artaxerxes' date, and then it matches within the range of the crucifixion date, and that solidifies it. But I think it's just a good exercise to go through all that. One of the, if you're interested in it, one of the, see if I can find it here real quick. One of the useful things that I found, digging on some history stuff here, let's see if I can bring it up. This thing here, see, this is by Elder J.N. Andrews. So this is actually J.N. Andrews. I don't know, I didn't get around to looking up the date of his life, but it was certainly there in the early 1900s. And he was writing this paper, and this paper is fairly long. Let's see how many pages. Looks like 55 pages. But he's dealing with the controversy over the three different possible decrees: Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes. And it's really good. And I didn't read every page. I read probably about 15 pages to really kind of get a picture of what he was presenting here. And he kind of opens it up to do exactly what I was telling you about trying it on those dates. But more than that, he establishes his reasoning as to why 457 is the only date you could use, meaning the only decree you could use. And it's pretty good. I won't go into more details on it right now, but
Where did you get that?
that's off of AdventistBeliefs.com. I could, let's see here if I can make it do it. Copy. See if it'll paste out the whole. There. Oh, that's really long. Can you take a snapshot of the screen or something?
Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Ken, your phone. Hang on. Ken's gonna get a picture of it. That would be interesting.
Yeah, it is a pretty good paper. Again, I didn't read the whole thing. Let me know when I can take it off the screen.
Just a second, he's just getting it. Okay, all right.
just for fun, some of these other resources that you can find that are really cool is you can find things like this. List of the popes. Here's every pope, or at least what they consider a pope. This is off a Catholic. I mean, the Catholics built this, but every pope, when they were, what their names were, and it brings it all the way up to today's date. So that was kind of, it's right there on Wikipedia. See what else might be. Constitution of the Clergy was kind of around dealing at the end of the 1260 days to establish what some of those decrees were, some of the rules that was being ordered for the shutting down of the Catholic papacy. So that would have been in 1798. But anyway, there's just lots of this stuff that now you can just really get to really quick. Just Google and get to whatever subject or question you're working on. Okay, enough about the 70 weeks. Anybody else got anything else you want to say about that or ask about that?
Is you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to leave. We have to go
That's
somewhere.
okay.
I'm going to come back. You do this every Sabbath?
Yeah, we're not always working on time prophecies, but Sabbath afternoons we're always on here.
Okay, well, thank you, and thank John for inviting me to come on. I appreciate that, and we'll talk with you guys later. God bless everybody.
Okay, God bless
See you, Dennis.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Bobby, is that part of what you have up there in the orange concerning how long will the visions be concerning the daily sacrifices and the transgression of desolation? Is that part of the 70 or the 2300?
That's where we get connections to the 2300, but the daily sacrifices and the desolation are really connected to the same thing, at least the same starting point.
But the daily sacrifices isn't added. It's not in there, is it? I mean, that's a
daily.
Yeah, the word sacrifices is.
Well, what's interesting is in the 70 weeks, there's comments about the Messiah putting an end to sacrifice, and we know that was in 31 AD at the crucifixion. It was never intended that sacrifices go on after that. So when we go to the 2300 days, we have to ask the question, well, so what daily is it talking about here? Is it talking about the physical, literal killing the lambs as a daily sacrifice? Because that was supposed to end in 31 AD. But this in the 2300 days seems to be talking about it in a context after the 2300 days, which is, after the 70 weeks, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, different versions they seem to have burnt offering or sacrifice. I remember studying a few weeks on just chapter 8 where I just crossed it out because it's added. It should say, and the daily was taken away from him.
Well, right, which is still referring to the daily sacrifice, but it's called the daily. It's the service that was done every day, morning and evening. But I think what's interesting is when you look at the ending of the 2300 days, not the beginning, but at the ending, from the ending to the second coming, you have a bunch of language that starts to fit and match the ending of the 70 weeks, such as the desolation being completed, such as the daily being stopped, such as the abomination of desolation. You kind of, here's what I think it's talking about. The 70 weeks is referring to the ending of the gospel through the Jewish nation, and the Jewish nation falling into such a condition of rejection that they crucified Christ. And so when they then added the stoning of Stephen, they pretty much closed the door as a nation, right? Well, then you get the similar language starting to happen in reference to the end of the 2300 days, but now it's going to be about the Christian church. So you're going to have the abomination of the Christian church. You're going to have the leaders of the Christian church that make things desolate. You're going to have the fall of the Christian church. In Great Controversy, she calls it apostate Protestantism, right? But nonetheless, you're going to have these sort of parallel themes that are at a time future in Revelation and after the 70 weeks in Daniel that kind of coincide with what we can learn about in the 70 weeks helps us start to see what it starts referring to at the end of the 2300 days.
I have a
I don't know if
question.
that made any sense.
I have a question, but I guess maybe we haven't arrived at that yet. Maybe I'm at the end of the story. So in my Bible, it says in Daniel 8:14, and he said to me, for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state.
Yeah, or cleansed.
So, yeah, so what exactly, I mean, I know we've gone over this before, but I need my brain neurons dusted. Something, then that would be 1844, correct?
Well, so let's start with 8:17 that adds the detail. This vision is about the time of the end. So this wouldn't be about the time of Christ or the daily or the sanctuary or the system of sacrifices that ended at 31 AD. This would be something way in the future after 31 AD. That's a helpful pice, right?
The time of the end is different than the end of time, right? So.
No, I don't think so. I think he's just saying down to the end of this world as we know it. So,
time of the end is a period of time about the end of events. The end of time is a specific point. This is the end of time. No more.
yeah,
time.
and I don't know enough about how to nail this down as a prophecy to which it should be if it's that specific of a difference. So I'm not saying I disagree. I know what it's telling me at least is that it has to do with sometime way after 31 AD.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, go ahead.
So then if we back up and we say, well, the 2300 days then is referring to a time when the daily is made desolate. Let's see what else. Maybe I should back up even a little bit more. Cast down some of the hosts, some of the stars to the ground and trampled. But it's referring to this horn, this little horn. And so now we're going to have to dive into Revelation and the other vision of Daniel to deal with the little horn. What is the little horn? Which gets to our need to understand the 1260 years. But nonetheless, just quick overview. Even he's exalted himself as high as the Prince of Hosts, and by him the daily was taken away or wiped out or destroyed. So I think the difference between the 70 weeks and the after the 70 weeks part of it, because 2300 days, as you know, is going to span over all of that time. It's going to span over the 70 weeks, and then it's going to span over after 31 and 34 AD. The difference is it switches from physical symbols, so physical sacrifices and physical temple, to everything becoming about what those things meant. So instead of the sacrifice being about a lamb, it's about Jesus. And instead of a temple being about the physical building in Jerusalem, it's about you or me, or it could even be Jesus as the original pattern of the temple. But it's switching over from symbolic to the antitype, as we normally call it. And so when we start reading these verses, like the daily taken away, that doesn't mean he stopped the lambs from being killed. He took away the real meaning of the cross, took away the effectiveness of the cross for the lives of the people. So if I just apply that to the era of the Pope, which is for the 1260 days, then this little horn thing as it's referring to within this 1260 days, is definitely destroying the meaning of the sacrifice, actually destroying the temple, because you look at all the degradation of the people and how they couldn't really come to know God and be changed in his image very well. And so he's wiping out the temple, which is the bodies, and he's taking away the meaning and understanding of the daily. So I think we have to do some of that translation from before 31 AD and after 31 AD. I don't know if that finished your question or not, but.
Yeah. So does verse 26 let's see if I know how to ask this, because I have an arrow there and I'm trying to figure out, bring up my brain again. But verse 26, referring to the vision of the evening and morning, it's referring to verse 14. Says it sealed up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So
Yeah, the evening and the mornings, that's the 1260, right?
yeah.
Not
Right.
the 2300. So the 1260 is very specifically the prophecy about the reign of the little horn, which appears both in Daniel and Revelation.
Well, but it says for 2300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that,
so that would be the 2300 days.
but, and then verse 26 is referring to verse 14, right?
I would say so.
The vision of the evenings and the mornings, that would be the 2300 day one.
Yeah, from verse 14.
Yeah, has been told is true, but seal up the vision, for it refers to many days from now. So where are you bringing the 12?
Well, no, hold on. Let me think about this. I just went to this morning. 2,300. Oh, I know. What version are you reading, Debbie?
ESV.
Who's got King James? What does it say for verse 14 in King James?
You got that? Ken's bringing it up on his phone unless someone else does. I could go get the King James.
Only because I want to see how the terminology matches.
Daniel 8 or Daniel 9?
Daniel 8, verse 14 or 26. Which one are you wanting, Bobby?
14.
2,300 evenings and mornings.
Yeah, there it is. Okay. So, like in New King James, it calls it days.
Oh, no, that's not King James. You're on King James.
Sorry.
2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. And in 26, you're talking about?
26.
In the vision of the evening and morning.
Which would still be days.
Yeah.
So it's got to be referring to verse 14.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And he was shocked, so shocked that it was going to be so long that it made him sick.
Right. Right. And that covers the time period where the 1260 fits into. But it's all the way from the beginning of the 70 weeks to 1844 would be the 2300 days.
So now what's the 1260? Is that part of the 2300?
It's under the 2300. So it actually starts in 538, which you can't establish by any historical foundation I could find. But you can establish that 1798 was the year that Napoleon conquered Rome and deposed the Pope. So and then they set up what was called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy, which were rules that the French Christian Church actually made to outlaw Catholic and the power of the Pope. So this is where we have the wounding of the little horn. This is in Revelation 11 and 12 and 13, also 7 is referring to this time period, this time frame. But it starts in 538. We only know that because of the 1798 date, and then go backwards 1260 years, and you'd arrive at 538. What was interesting is it's true that Justinian was the emperor during this time period, and his army did kick the Goths. They call them the Goths. I think, I can't remember if it was the Visigoths or the Ostrogoths. I think the Ostrogoths did kick them out of Italy, out of Rome, and reset up in the most conclusive way, complete rulership of the Bishop of Rome over all of the Roman Empire, as not only the ecclesiastical leader and authority, but also as the civil leader and authority. And that was established from Wikipedia and other places. You're basically going to see that was between 536 and 539, 540. But we can conclude that these decrees, this rulership, because the battle over Italy by Justinian's Roman imperial army against the Ostrogoths, that took place starting in 537 and was concluded in 538. So again, working backwards from 1798, which is a pretty easy date to establish, we can prove by our Pope's list that was indeed Pope Pius VI. He was Pope. Napoleon took over, stripped the Pope of his power, and that was the wounding of the little horn.
So, so the 1260, you're using 1798 as a starting point. Where in the Bible do we have the 1260?
1260 is in Revelation. So you'll have it in Revelation 11, Revelation 12. There's something in 13. Daniel 7. What's Daniel 7:25 say?
7:25 says, he shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the laws, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and a half a time. Oh, that's
there. The times, and half a time is 1260.
Right, but then we have to find where that is. Well, then going on, it says, but the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away and be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. Their kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey them. So then we have to turn to Revelation to find where that time and half a times ends, and then establish.
Well, Revelation won't give you a date. It's just going to repeat similar stuff about the little horn. We can get the little horn uprooting the three horns. We can find out when the three horns were uprooted. For instance, the three horns, let me switch over to my notes on this one. The three horns was the Hurley, the Vandals, and the Ostrogoths. So if you look at the list of the Roman Empire at the time of 400 to 500 AD, we'll find that the main powers were the Franks, which is now France, the Alemanni, which is now Germany, the Lombards, which was Italy, the Suevi, which was now Portugal, Anglo-Saxon, which is now England, the Burgundians, which is now Switzerland, the Visigoths, which is Spain, and then the Hurley, they held actually the peninsula of Italy. The Vandals were on the northern border of Africa, so kind of the across the water from Italy. And then the Ostrogoths, they were north inland a little ways across the water from Italy, the peninsula of Italy. Well, those three were uprooted over a period of 100 plus years. The emperors kept working on that, and finally the Ostrogoths were holding Rome until the battle I was talking about in 537 that ended in 538. So that gives us pretty good foundation on that. But I think you also got a pretty good foundation on in Revelation. You take the description of the little horn from Revelation and from Daniel, both, put them all together. And the only thing that really fits is the rise of the full control of the papacy over the entire empire of the known world, all the way to when he lost that power by Napoleon's hand and has not regained that kind of power ever since. As it says in Daniel, when God sits in judgment of the little horn, his power will be taken away forever and ever.
Yeah, I just see the notes that I it's nice to revisit things when you forget. But in February 10, 1798, the mortal wound where the French Revolution, Napoleon's General Berthier entered Rome and proclaimed a republic, took the Pope prisoner, and the Pope died shortly thereafter in Valence, France. It said that marks the 1798 marks the end of the 1260 years of papal supremacy.
Exactly.
Well, now if I would just look at my notes, I wouldn't have had to ask that question.
Well, and again, this exercise was about establishing it not on previous notes necessarily, but where do we get this info outside of just our Adventist catalogs?
Right.
And so I went through Wikipedia and Encyclopedia and the Catholic Encyclopedia to collect a lot of this info. And it was cool to be able to go, okay, so over here in the Wikipedia, it's talking about Justinian and his general named Byzantine. And so then I could look in the list of popes from the Catholic Encyclopedia and go, sure enough, they say that was the guy who was the pope in that time, and that was the emperor, right? So there was a pope that was overthrown by the emperor, or actually, sorry, I got that backwards. There was the pope that was set up after the Ostrogoths were kicked out in 538. And then, of course, the other end, that Pope Pius V, he was the one that was arrested. It's funny, in the Catholic Encyclopedia, they try to sort of make that a little bit invisible. Like, they don't make much comment about that. But nonetheless, it's there.
And so what do we do with the time between 1798 and 1844?
Only that it was the time in these prophecies that talk about the little horn being overthrown and the power given over to the people. Well, that's not really referring to a physical government. That's referring to the Bible got into the hands of the people now, and they couldn't just have the wool pulled over their eyes anymore. So we call that the Reformation, right? Which started in the mid 1500s, but it kind of precipitates the fall of the popes because the French Revolution even was because so much was being learned and so much was being known of the fallacies of the current church and the garbage that it was teaching, that it started getting braver of rebelling against that church. And when it finally fully rebelled, Napoleon, they set up rules. It's kind of interesting to read that. Again, it's called the Civil Constitution of the Clergy. And this is in Wikipedia. So if you just search Civil Constitution of the Clergy, it goes through all kinds of stuff in here that they made as new rules. And a lot of them had to do with, no more Pope and no more tithes and offerings to the Catholic Church. That was illegal then. They also made it, see, let me just scan through here. This Civil Constitution Clergy. Oh yeah, they made rules about bishops. Now these would be priests and bishops, not in the old Catholic Church at this time, but in the new French Christian Church. They took away the power of the church to be able to give authority as to who could speak who could teach, who could, I mean, they just did a whole lot of stripping of that power by civil power and rules. They made rules about the clergy, salaried, who paid them, just all kinds of stuff. Kind of interesting just to read through some of that and figure out what the French Revolution was doing to strip away the power of the papacy.
So Bobby, I don't know where your direction is going, but I'd like you to refresh my memory of then 1844 and the restoring to the rightful state.
I mean, what happened then, or how do we get to that date?
Well, no, I think we established that, but what happened then? It's not like God went to another department to do something else upstairs.
Yeah, when we understand that the sanctuary that needs to be cleansed is us, then really when you see this whole time chart laid out, 70 weeks, 2,300 days, 1260 kind of right in the middle of the, after the crucifixion era, what you really have is God promising to fix what Paul wrote about. Paul wrote about, as did Peter, Antichrist, deceivers coming, and then Paul says there must first come a falling away. So the major bottom of the barrel of the falling away was the 1260 years. So that's where you've got the greatest deception going on, cruelty, tyranny, up the wazoo on the people. And so that would be what Paul is referring to as the falling away. Then comes the promise, though, that in the middle of that darkness, he would begin to shine light, right? Like a verse that says, or where the enemy comes in like a flood, he'll raise up a standard or a truth, an idea, an understanding. And so that Reformation starts before 1798 and continues on. And so then the question becomes, what's different, or what is supposed to happen different at the 1844 mark of the Reformation versus, say, I don't know, pick Martin Luther's 1520 something deal. And I think really what you have is all the way through there, God is working on destroying the lies and the deception of the devil. And the idea, you look at what they did with, for instance, just the cathedral. So we took the idea from the old 70 weeks era of them needing to build a temple that was magnificent. So much so that the people were just in awe of the temple. Even Titus was in awe of this great edifice. And we turned it into, now in the New Testament era, we're supposed to do it again. So we built cathedrals. And how do we do that? Well, we lie to the people about God. We make sure they think he wants to burn them. And then if they pay money and offerings to help us build things like St. Peter's Cathedral, then they can get time off purgatory and so on and so on and so on. So this is the destruction of the character of God, the knowledge of God. In 1844 was a time in the future for Daniel, time in the future for the apostles. Now it's time in our history, not our future, but where God was saying, now it's going to be time to bring that light fully out to destroy the darkness. It hadn't been completed yet, coming into 1844. But God was saying after 1844, after the 2,300 days. Now, it doesn't say how long after, it just says after. So then shall the sanctuary be cleansed is really about the cleansing, clearing up of the heavenly sanctuary, which is the misunderstandings about God, since Jesus is the heavenly sanctuary. And then the cleansing of the earthly sanctuary, which is us, not a building. And that work was specifically to have a major kickoff starting in 1844.
Wait a minute, I can't write that fast. So
I know, sorry.
the clearing up of the heavenly sanctuary and the misunderstandings, right?
Yep.
So that was for the heaven, and the cleansing of what did you say? The
The
clearing of,
earthly
okay.
sanctuary, which is us.
which is a cleansing of earthly, which is us. Okay. So can we say from what you said that Christ equates, he is this heavenly sanctuary?
Yeah, Christ, that's pretty well established in Desire of Ages. Plus Jesus said, destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. So he declared himself the sanctuary, the temple.
What chapter was that?
Jesus saying that would have been in John when he did the first cleansing of the temple.
Yeah.
See where that was.
And also the DA one.
Desire of Ages is going to be the chapter called Bethesda and the Sanhedrin.
Okay.
I can look up a page here in a second, but let me see if I can find this where he cleansed the temple. Must be back. If anybody can find it faster than me, go ahead. Teacher, okay, that's Nicodemus. Before that, I did not make my father's house into a house of prayer. Yeah, okay, verse 19 of John 2.
2:19. Okay.
Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll rebuild it.
So that establishes the scripture one, and then I like this. This is getting clear every time you go over this. Maybe my brain is just getting clear. I don't know.
Let's see, Desire of Ages. Let's see, I guess I gotta go to the chapter list. Oh, I'm in the chapter already. Well, that's cool.
Am I?
Yes.
This app that wiped out all my markings, so Jesus is not accessible for Jesus had the Sabbath. And the rabbis come to magnify the law. Jesus stated to them, spread forbid in such case. So Jesus repelled the charges. Yeah, right here. Okay, so page 208.
Okay.
When Moses was about to build the sanctuary as a dwelling place for God, Moses was directed to make all things according to the pattern shown him in the mount. Moses was full of zeal to do God's work. The most talented, skillful men were at his hand to do his suggestions, yet he was not to make a bell or pomegranate tassel or fringe or curtain or any vessel except according to the pattern. God called Moses into the mountain, and he revealed to him the heavenly things. So we're talking about the heavenly pattern of the heavenly sanctuary. And then it says, the Lord covered him with his own glory, that he might see the pattern. And according to it, the pattern, all things were to be made. So Israel, whom he desired to make his dwelling place, he had revealed his glorious ideal of character. The pattern was shown them in the mount, when the law was given from Sinai, and when the Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful, gracious, long-suffering, abundant goodness and truth, keeping mercy for thousands, for forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. That's the pattern. Then it says, Israel had chosen their own way. They had not built it according to the pattern. Wait a minute, I thought they built the sanctuary exactly how he said to. So this isn't referring to the building. They had not built it according to the pattern, but Christ, the true temple for God's indwelling, molded every detail of his earthly life in harmony with God's ideal. He said, I delight to do thy will, O my God, yea, thy law is within my heart. So, in the same way, our characters are supposed to be builded for an habitation of God through the Spirit. And we are to make all things according to the pattern, even him who suffered for us, leaving us the example that we should follow in his steps. Which actually then connects to here are they that follow the Lamb wherever he goes.
Okay. Follow the Lamb.
So all that time we wasted back in the late 70s and 80s arguing over the heavenly building was a waste of time and energy.
I know. I mean, it's still current. I mean, you still hear that.
They're still having that argument. And they're still having the argument about rising by faith. So 1844 was the point of the time prophecies were supposed to end, meaning God didn't add more time prophecies after this. He just promised that after the conclusion of the 2300 days, he would work out and accomplish the cleansing, the rebuilding, the renewing, the regenerating, the clarifying of both the heavenly and the earthly sanctuary. And that fulfillment of that prophecy is still in progress.
So basically, he's trying to clear up him and us.
Yep. Which is why it says it's so important that his people reveal his character, because he's not coming down here physically to do it himself this time. His followers are going to do it this time. Meaning clear up the falsities about God as well as be transformed.
His character and his name. I'm trying to write. So his people are clearing up his character and his name. And what did you say after that?
Well, just that he's not coming to do it physically himself. He's going to do it through his people.
Right.
And so you must have the full cleansing of the earthly, which is the humans, sanctuary, in order to clarify and purify the knowledge and understanding of the heavenly.
Repeat that sentence.
You have to have the cleansing of the earthly sanctuary, which is his people, in order to cleanse and clarify, clear up the deceptions about the heavenly, which is Christ.
In order to clear up the heavenly. I love this. Thank you for your patience. The heavenly, which is
Christ.
Is Christ, and the understanding of what he really came to do, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Bobby. I'm really excited about this.
Good.
I'm really excited about this.
Well, I haven't always felt brave enough to say it this plain.
Well, you know what? You know that I need things really, really plain. So I guess I needed a private one. It's not so private here, but I don't hear anybody else talking. I guess this is my day of clearance or clearing the head. Okay. You know, I know this is really close, but this is not the topic you have at hand. But because of all that's happening, I've been going to the end of Daniel 11, very end, where we never hear anything about, and into 12. And I'd be excited about you speaking plainly on those notes sometime, because it follows all of this, I feel, you know, and we've got 1290, but I've been looking things up like the Libyans and these different things, and I don't know that you can be that plainly.
Well, I can't say for sure that I can even comment because I haven't recently worked on those, but you can. I was just going to look real quick. So you're talking about the end of Daniel 11?
Yep. I the very, 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 and I mean probably start with 40. I don't know. I have written in there 30 angels message, but getting down to where we never ever speak about. I have thoughts on it. I've been there many times, and I have thoughts, but I don't have full thoughts. I don't know, let's see where one could start. You have to get the tenor starting at 40, but speaking of especially verse 43 and 44, but you have to read that before. And the glorious holy mountain. I mean, right there, what I feel is the glorious holy mountain is God's, the faithful church. The church of the faithful is what I have as that so far, but I feel like we're living there in verse 43 and 4 at the moment.
Okay.
And I have some ideas, but I want to hear from someone else. And every time something comes up about, Portland or this or that out there, I go back here and I read, and so I started looking up Libyans then and Libyans now, which is very fascinating. And the who else did I look up? Egypt then and now, and who they are. If it has any literality, I don't know if that's a word, but anyway, to this. And the
Is it
Cushites.
literal or is it symbolic, you mean?
Yeah, and looking up the Cushites then and now, because I think we're camping on 43, 44 at the moment in history, and yet I hear no preaching on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, I mean, I didn't want to distract them if you wanted to go more on to.
No, I
Because
again,
follows.
I don't know that I can work on this too much at the moment. I've done a bit in 12, but I haven't even looked at sort of in a detailed research way, trying to figure out what I think it's saying in 11. So I can't probably comment too much on it.
Right. Well, I know. I mean, maybe none of us will know until, but if we keep reading, then when it happens, we see it. And then
Yeah.
at the end of 12, I don't know what this is, 1,290 days and 1,335 days. I don't know. If I knew, I've forgotten. But anyway, that's just some thoughts for.
Sure. Something worth working more on. And really today we're working on timelines in the past, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to bring out about John or Frank. You guys got any thoughts brewing, or we put you to sleep over there?
No, still awake. No thoughts from me. I mean, Debbie used the term faithful church. I was thinking sometimes we refer to them as the invisible church. So, yeah.
Well, I guess I looked glorious holy mountain. I have written here many things. The paganism consistently magnifies itself against the Lord and all of that. But then we have the glorious. And I looked up the word glorious, like we have the glorious church in Ephesians 5:25-27. We have his glorious name in Isaiah 63:14. We have the glorious throne set on a high place in the sanctuary in Jeremiah 17 and 2 Corinthians 3. We got God's glorious people, God's people Israel in Isaiah 60. That's probably a key one, as well as Ezekiel 36:8, where we have the mountains of Israel. So gathering all of those, as well as several in Psalms and another one in Isaiah 4, I came up with the glorious holy mountain as the church of the faithful is what
And glorious is always going to be indicating God's presence there, right? Every time something got glorious,
or his character.
Yeah, his character, his spirit, his presence. That's the sanctuary or the tabernacle wasn't glorified in the wilderness when they first set it up until Shekinah glory had descended into it or on it, and then it was.
That's why the cleansing of the sanctuary of the earth is so important, to reflect that character.
Right.
So we can shine the final shining or the final light to this dying earth.
Yep, very good.
I after this study here, I'm feeling like, oh wow, I've really let God down.
Well, we've all been off track plenty.
I was going to read Ezekiel 36:8. It says, "But you, O mountains of Israel, shall shoot forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they will soon come home." So that was where I got the, the mountains of Israel, and then Isaiah 60 is great about God's people Israel. And then, of course, we connect it with his glorious church when it says in Ephesians 5, let's see, let me see there. I'm sort of kind of excited about this glorious holy mountain thing. Ephesians 5, 25. Where do I have that? Well, 25 to 27. It talks about husband and wife, and that he might sanctify her from cleansing her by washing of water with words, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, my Bible says, or the glorious, in glory.
Right. Right, which is the whole mission of, at the end of the 2300 days going forward, however long a time it takes, it doesn't say, but the mission of that, which you just read, is what kicks in there at 1844. I mean, the entire Earth's history is about that, but we see it divided up into eras of, big problems, and then reformations, and then more big problems. And, it's kind of interesting to plot out the major rise and falls of the church over the entire history of the world. What I mean by that is you've got Adam and Eve created in perfection, and then there is a major fall when they eat the fruit. Well, then they learn, and they're learning, and you get Abel and Seth, and what they're learning all the way to Enoch. There's kind of this revelation of truth going on, but then it ends in the world having to be destroyed with a flood. So that's a major crash. And then you go from there to Abraham, sort of learning, knowing, and growing in truth. And then you arrive in Egypt, where the whole nation is sort of wiped out with idolatry. And that's a major crash. And then you have out of that, a new reformation begins, Moses, the people, and that leads us all the way down to the crucifixion of Christ, major crash, right? Ending of the nation. Then you step into, okay, no more about just this nation or that nation. It's going to be about each individual connecting with God in spirit and truth. And then we have the rise of the Reformation that then ends up in the world Christian church, the universal church, which crashes now into the Dark Ages. And then the Reformation of Martin Luther. Anyway, just kind of watching those go up and down and up and down. What we can learn by paralleling all of them is all the characteristics of how prophecy describes all those events. And that helps us see prophecies in the future of how those descriptions, what they mean. Like desolation, for instance. I hear so many people wanting to argue over what's the actual desolation. Well, wait a minute, you can watch this desolation happen again and again and again in different eras, different time periods. And so it's got to be that we're talking about desolation in the future. It's got to be the same kind of pattern. And that's how I sort of view working on prophecy is don't just read a few verses here and then guess at where to plug them in the timeline or what it's talking about, but looking at the patterns as they've already unfolded again and again and again, and then connected with what would then be. Like, for instance, a locust is a good one. You have this locust, and in Revelation, they come up out of this bottomless pit and they make this dark cloud. And then you can find locusts in the Old Testament. And instead of guessing at black helicopters in Revelation, we can go to the Old Testament in Jeremiah and Ezekiel and read about these locusts. And pretty soon it's giving detailed descriptions about, the face of a man and the hair of a woman, and the tail of a scorpion, and so on and so on. And pretty soon it just comes right out and says, well, the head, right, is the leaders of Israel, or the leaders of the church. And then you're getting a little bit too specific. You better not go talking about that too much further or you're going to get shot. But it's very clear when we see those patterns, how they're laid out in previous eras of this reformation and fall into darkness and so on. And then therefore in the future, what is that, locusts out of the bottomless pit thing? It's not black helicopters. It's the leaders of religion totally blackening off a view of the sun, like hair of sackcloth, and making it unable to see. And so that's the lies and deceptions that are taught by the religious leaders of the time. And anyway, that gets starting to step on our toes a little bit, so we don't like that.
Bobby, I had figured out in Joel, it talks the cutting locusts and the swarming locusts and
Chewing locusts.
yeah, that's Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, and Rome.
And maybe in that era, right?
Right. But I just thought.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Go ahead, Frank.
So, from what I've been hearing then, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the desolation that leads to destruction to me is the wrong view of God.
Correct.
Because that's what these people are going to be screaming for, is their own destruction when he comes.
Right.
Because of fear of this God that shouldn't be there because he is of love.
Right.
So am I wrong in thinking that? Or?
No, because you're talking again about what destroys their ability or makes them a desolate person or people is the lies and deception that the locusts are propagating or teaching or enforcing, or where we want to put that. We kind of see it in the Dark Ages era, but there was also the era of the leaders of the church with Jesus, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees, and he came to free them from that darkness, and he said to them, hey, you're shutting up the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You don't want to enter in yourself, neither will you let those who want to. Give you an example. It's really cute. I was having a discussion with someone this week. They don't have much church background at all. What little bit they did was not real great. And so they're talking to me about things they'd like to have different in their life. Well, I can have that conversation a little ways before pretty soon I'm going, oh, wait a minute, to really fix this, you need to know what God's really like. And to deal with your depression and suicide, what if it's connected to what you were taught about God? Sure enough, it was connected to the fear about God torturing people and God picking. You don't get to pick because he's going to choose you either to be in hell forever or he's going to choose for you to be in heaven forever, and you're not sure which it's going to be. So that fear built up and mounted up until it's causing depression and suicidal thoughts and tendencies, and so there's no way, in my mind, there's no way to really work on fixing it. We could do a little bit of work just at first to kind of tell you we love you, tell we care about you, you really mean something, blah, blah, blah. But if we don't get to correcting the sackcloth that the locusts have created, we're not, it's going to be desolation. It's going to wipe them out. So I think when we see Jesus say to Israel, behold, your house is left to you desolate. That was at the end of the woes of the Pharisees. So this was after 3.5 years of presentation of the truth, major rejection on their part. He knew that no matter what parable he told, they were going to shout, crucify him in a couple of days. So he was referring to the desolation that was caused by the abomination. That's why it's a desolation that comes on the wing of abomination, or abomination that causes desolation. The abomination was the twisticated version of truth about God that the leaders of the time were teaching. So that's about as simple
and still happens. Still happens today.
Yep, still happening.
Whether it's Satan with a pitchfork in hell, or you don't know when your judgment is.
Right.
I mean, anything that uses fear of God to me is an abomination.
Right. Exactly right.
So in our time, Bobby, the abomination of desolation what is, I mean, when it's time to leave what and go where?
You mean at the second coming?
Well, just
Oh, you're talking about leave the abomination. I got you. Okay.
okay. I'm trying to find the right words. I think in
Yeah,
Matthew.
I got you. So I think it's fair and not unkind to know about our own history, that we started in 1844, and the goal was to help us know the character, the kingdom, and the law. You remember the first focus kind of got on to the sanctuary and to the law, so that's the the teachings and the character. And the intention was that if we listened and understood and accepted and were filled with the Spirit, that within a few short years, the whole world would have heard it, known it. The latter rain would have fallen. And as she says, Christ would have come ere long this. But instead, we clung to the abomination in too many ways. And we pretty soon were arguing over the 10 toes, and we're arguing over theories of rights by faith and justification by faith, until here it is, the sort of preaching of Stephen happens in 1844 for our people. I'm not talking about the world, just our family, and majorly rejected. And it has thrown us into a desolate condition known as Laodicea for a long time. So if we're talking about Reformation, Jesus came to the desolate land, which was Israel. Before he was born, it was desolate. And it was only headed to more desolation. But nonetheless, he came, was born in it, in the nation of Israel, and then grew up and went to minister to, as he said, to the lost sheep of the house of Adventism or whatever. So that is the work. The work is to bring about clarity, not just for Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, and all the rest of that, but even the desolation of our own people, because where that is accepted and known, which is where you're going to have to leave now. I'm not talking about leave something physically. I'm talking about leave behind the wrong ideas and getting involved in the arguments of the wrong ideas, or even have the conversations about all those wrong ideas, but simply putting before the people, thus saith the Lord. And here's what it says about Jesus. When he was challenged at why he was doing what he was doing and saying what he was saying, he only had a thus saith the Lord. And so as we do that, we are leaving all of locust teaching and Babylonian teaching and Greek teaching and Roman teaching behind. And it's not that we're trying to separate ourselves from people. Jesus didn't do that. He went in, and amongst the people, they began to separate themselves from him until they were shouting, crucify him, and some never repented or returned. So that's what the leave, it looks like. That's what the separating looks like. It's got to match Jesus's pattern to the very nation that was given the gift of the scrolls, the prophecies, the teachings, the writings of the forefathers, as we know it as the Bible. So I was just having this conversation with John earlier that I believe that just like in every other era where there was major darkness, God delivered a gift. Like that gift might have been the writings of Isaiah or the writings of Jeremiah to help the people leave the darkness behind and come into the light. And I believe that in 1844, and shortly after that, he began to give us another gift. Before, in the era of Martin Luther, the gift was the New Testament. Yeah, the Old Testament was there too, but you'll notice most of what Martin Luther and other reformers are sort of keying in on is the life of Jesus and the gospel. Well, then that gospel got preached in so many various ways. By the time of 1840s, it's so convoluted and so many variations and so confused and still kind of connected and wrapped up with Dark Ages thinking and papacy, even though we were supposed to be Protestants, that God said, okay, I'm going to add another gift here. And that gift, just like too many times in the past, ended up on the shelves collecting dust instead of us actually grabbing that gift and running with it. And I'm talking about the book Desire of Ages. And yes, I'll add Great Controversy and Patriarchs of Prophets, Prophets and Kings, Christ's Object Lessons, Thoughts Amount of Blessings, but primarily Desire of Ages. That's this amazing gift that should straighten all this out in our minds, but we're somehow able to overlook it because it's just on the shelf collecting dust.
So, oh, you're going to say something, Ken?
Yeah, another thought on the cleansing of the sanctuary in 1844. If his people on earth is a sanctuary, then the Great Disappointment removed a lot of the weeds out of the sanctuary, so to speak. Only the really committed ones stayed on.
Right.
So, and I was, from what you said, so I'm gathering the word leave or leaving is equal to leaving behind that wrong teaching, whatever it is.
Correct.
And clearing up the sanctuary, but leaving, yeah, and anyway, I just put down leaving is equal to leaving the wrong teaching.
Right. So just to give you practical examples of my own self, you know that I love to go to war against the wrong idea of the cross. That's because I've left Babylon, and now we're going to teach what Jesus said about the cross. Or another one is, a lot of our people are panicked about trying to figure out how, what's that word? Spiritualism is going to sneak its way into the church when they don't realize that the biggest dilemma of spiritualism is already in our church, and it's called prayer warriors. So we have to leave those false ideas behind and work on helping people understand the truth about all these things. And in that way, we will cause, the Spirit through us will cause the fall of Babylon.
Another one is just to consider the way Jesus did that very thing, which was, you have heard it said, but I tell you that Jesus was constantly correcting their false ideas. And one of the scariest places a church can be is to think that somehow they've got it all figured out and that they have no correcting to do or to have done to them. In fact, the way we tend to do church today is actually very self-centered, because a church becomes focused on protecting self, and at the same time we have a Savior who was not focused on protecting self, but instead was focused on saving those who would become attracted to him and his character. So even in the way that we generally tend to operate church, we are not properly representing our Lord, because when we make church about setting ourselves apart from other denominations only for the purpose of making ourselves more important, again, that's not Christ-like behavior. To be seeking and looking to be in constant argument with other denominations is not Christ-like behavior. And so there's so many things about the way we do church today, and I'm not just talking about Adventism, I'm talking about Christianity in general, that is so un-Christ-like. It just amazes me that it's so hard for the everyday Christian to even see it. But it's just there. It's true. and the question is, who's willing to say it?
Well, so yeah, I think, John, we could say that. So come out of her, my people, is not moving from one denomination to another or starting a new one. It is actually about stopping believing that the church is established based on that guy or that building and actually needing to become the church or
Yes.
the servants of Jesus or those that are filled with the Spirit to represent him on the earth. And all the rest of that stuff just fades away. I love how Desire of Ages, talks about in the Go Teach All Nations, how this message, the message that must come at the end, the message of the gospel, must be a message adapted to all peoples, all classes. It actually starts removing our need to even define, those groups, because this is for everybody.
Yeah.
It was kind of cute the other day. I was talking to that person I was telling you about, and I did not ask them what their church background, like what denomination. We had a whole conversation. We worked on stuff about God, gave them an exciting something to think about. And it wasn't until that whole conversation was done, I asked, so could you tell me which, building you grew up in? And when she told me, I knew what the next piece was, because it was Calvin. Calvin is the background. So that's where the God picking for you question came. That was our second session, right? So anyway, but we're not doing that because we got to figure out if you're coming from a bad one. We're all coming from one that's become desolate, and it needs to be about the life flow of God through the Spirit, not anything else. So,
Right.
well, so that got us off timelines, but I think I better
No,
stop there
I
and
mean,
give you
I
guys
think
a break.
we definitely covered timelines. I don't think we can
Yeah.
say that we didn't. So,
Well, when you edit this one down, you can stop it there when we got finished with the timeline, maybe. All right. Well, thank you
is that
guys.
you
Unless
hoping I will do that, or?
Oh no, I don't know. I don't even go watch them, so I don't know what people go there and see. I had someone text me the other day and say, "Thank you very much for that one where you were discussing this, that, and the other thing." And I was trying to remember. Well, I wonder what I said. Oh.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's time to quit, but I just want to make this one last comment. One of the defining moments in my study life and my getting to know God better was when I just was reading this book, The Ministry of Healing, and I ran into this statement that just smacked my Pharisaical face, and it was this one. Christ recognized no distinction of nationality or rank or creed. The scribes and Pharisees desired to make a local and a national benefit of the gifts of heaven and to exclude the rest of God's family in the world.
Yeah.
But Christ came to break down every wall of partition, and that just made me go, wait a minute. All this time I've been spending clearly defining how I'm better in my theology and my understanding of Scripture and all of that, how I'm so much better than, that other church down the road, whatever the other church may be, just got squashed, right? It just got stomped on by the truth that is in Christ.
Yeah.
So, which is good. It's painful sometimes. The pruning is painful, but it's good, because what he's really offering is a religion that can affect my heart and my life and not be something I practice one day a week. So just wanted to finish with that thought.
Well, and I was going to just say, Barb hasn't really said much. I don't even know how long she's been on here. Do you have any thoughts for us, Barb, before we quit?
I'll have to confess that I literally fell asleep before it started and during it a little bit, and I'm gonna hope to rewatch it when you replay it.
Oh, that's okay. We weren't trying to pick on you. You don't have to confess.
I'm on call, and I guess I needed a little nap or something.
You gotta get some sleep. Yeah.
Get that sleep while you can. Nothing wrong with that.
All right, so let me have prayer, and then we'll end for today. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love and your grace. And sometimes these things like timelines can feel a little bit dry, a little bit academic, but maybe still good for us just to solidify our foundation of what you said, and that you know what you're talking about when you tell us what's going to happen before it happens. And then even if we can't see clearly about what you said is going to happen next, that we know that when we need to know, you will reveal it. You will be able to help us to understand. But more importantly than that, that in all of this, we see the great need for knowing your character, being able to stay off the false ideas that the devil's constantly wanting to pick on and get us to do. And so we thank you for that opportunity, and just continue to inspire us in our studies. In Jesus' name, amen.